The things that I was struck by the day after looking over the different reactions, particularly from people on the left or liberal progressive commentators, is that some of them praised it quite a bit, said it was a real strong progressive speech, talking about the positive role that government can play in the lives of people. Others were not so charitable, and I think Matthew Rothschild from Progressive Magazine actually described it as lukewarm liberalism at home, coupled with Bush League justifications for lawlessness and hypocrisy abroad. Now that's pretty strong criticism, right?
Right.
So it kind of ranged, but it struck me that for those that felt that it was a progressive speech or a strong liberal progressive speech, I think you could only say that given the kind of larger context in which the political discourse in this country has moved so sharply to the right over the last, 30 to 40 years, right? If this had been a speech that had been given in the mid-60s by a Johnson or a Kennedy, it might not have appeared to be quite as liberal as it maybe did to commentators today, given the the way in which the ideological pendulum has sort of swung more sharply to the right since Reagan.
Right.
So that was one thing. Some people did see it as a progressive speech, but again, I don't think you could see it as a progressive speech unless you are also recognizing that we've moved so far to the right that anything that's more mildly liberal, lukewarm liberalism, sounds progressive to some people, given what we've been dealing with over the last 30 years or so. So that was the one context. But he talked a lot about deficit reduction early on. And again, I think there was a missed opportunity there. He talks about how some economists think, this is one of the major issues that we have to deal with and reduce the deficit. But yet, there are other economists who say that the emphasis on deficit reduction is way overblown.
Yes.
That it's much more important to be talking about job creation, and that the deficit, well, it's not a good thing to run up such a large deficit, but that the deficit as a percentage of gross national product is not that great, and that it really, in some cases it's good and necessary to run up a bit of a deficit if you're investing that money in ways that are going to create jobs for people and to get the economy moving. So to some extent, Obama is buying into this austerity politics, which I think we talked about a couple of weeks ago on the program. And so that was a little disappointing that he still kind of tied into seeing that as the central political issue that he has to wrestle with, rather than saying, well, of course we want to eventually reduce the deficit, but first and foremost, we've got to put people back to work, and he did talk about investing in the infrastructure, and to do that, you have to perhaps in the short term increase the deficit a little bit in order to make those investments and to get those jobs rolling.
Yeah. He talked about a couple of economists, he being Matthew Rothschild, a couple of economists that didn't get mentioned.
Right.
And,
well, a couple of our favorites, Paul
yes.
Krugman and Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, who two of the most, both Nobel Prize winning economists, and both tend to be more Keynesian in their approach to looking at the role of government. And I think they're spot on, and they're certainly much more accurate in their predictions and analysis about the economy than some of the economists the president was citing, right, who are deficit hawks.
So you create jobs, you get the economy moving.
Yeah, I
mean,
that's,
you create capital.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Keynesian approach, right, that, the fiscal policy of government, government spending, government investments, particularly in infrastructure, create jobs. And when you're in a depression or a recession, that's the most important thing that you need to do. And so that's why we were talking when Obama first came into office with the need for a large stimulus program. He came up with a stimulus program, but many of us following, listening to Paul Krugman, were saying this is way too small. It's not going to deliver the outcome that we want. It needs to be much bigger. And I think that was demonstrated by, how slow the economic growth was and the job recovery was over the first 4
Right.
years of Obama's administration. So he should have been bolder in his first administration in having a larger stimulus program. And now he needs to come back. And again, he talked about infrastructure investment as such a critical need, and it is such a critical need. And I think a bigger, bolder program there would have been more desirable from my point of view.
Yeah. And it fits in, does it not, with the argument about big government versus small government? I mean, if you have a government that is attempting to create jobs and build the industrial sector and the working sector up, it's got to play a larger role. It's got to help create.
Yes. One of the surest ways to create a lot of good jobs is for government to make those investments in the building infrastructure. Obama talked about a large number, I forget what the exact number was, of bridges that are in critical need of repair or replacement. Just that issue alone. I mean, just think if we had money that was appropriated to go ahead and redo all those bridges. Necessary repairs, think of all the people that we're putting to work from the construction industry. And again, it's stimulating the private sector. It's government tax money being used to address a critical public need, but also that money is going to private contractors who are providing those jobs and doing the work. And that's just one small, tiny area, right? I mean, there are many other infrastructural needs that we have that could and should be addressed. Spending on schools would be another way to pump money into the economy, and we've many times addressed the important issue of increasing education and training, and the president did address that. He talked about a universal early education program and cited some examples from some surprising places, right? Oklahoma and Georgia, who have this sort of early preschool type of program that he was praising. But again, that's money well spent. There's a lot of research that shows us that if we invest money in those kids, particularly if they're coming out of impoverished backgrounds, they're coming from homes where there's not a lot of perhaps intellectual stimulation, the parents don't have a lot of resources or social capital to invest in their children, that those early education programs do provide an awful lot of enrichment to those kids, brings them up to speed. When they start school, they're going to do so much better, and they're going to be much more successful in the long run. So, we really have a lot of evidence that there are lots of good outcomes that come about later on in life if we invest in kids early on and get them up to speed, to say nothing of the fact that we're preventing a bunch of delinquency, because one of the clearest links in the criminological literature between delinquency is school failure. So school failure leads to delinquency. So again, if kids aren't ready to learn, they lack some of the resources when they first get to school and they fall behind and they experience failure, we know that a large number of those kids will eventually move over to delinquency. So all kinds of good things come, but you have to make that investment in the first place, right? You've got to come up with the money in order to create that investment, knowing then later on, like many investments, you expect to get a greater return later on, right? And so the concern right now from the Republicans and others is, well, how are you going to pay for that? Well, you pay for it by having a fair tax system, a progressive tax system. You pay for it by making other kinds of priority allocations within the budget, right? Do we need to spend over $1 trillion a year on military needs? No, we don't. We could drastically reduce the military budget without harming national security in the least. We could reallocate some of that money. We could make corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes, which they haven't been doing for the last 30 years. I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which that money could be produced and then invested, and the returns down the road, would be great. And so I think the president, he was in the ballpark in talking about some of these issues, but too much talk about deficit reduction, not enough talk about how you raise the sufficient funds to make the investments in infrastructure, and not enough talk about the long-term outcomes, the productive outcomes of that kind of critical investment.
And one of the criticisms which I heard was that in his speech he was talking about how we all have to pay our fair share.
Mm-hmm.
And some concern raised about the fact that the wealthy have not been paying their fair share for so long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to lump the wealthy and the middle class and the needy together and say we all have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no sense of disproportionality
Right.
that's suggested,
Mm-hmm.
that some people ought to pay more
Mm-hmm.
than
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole notion of a progressive tax system, right? That those who have the ability to pay are going to pay a little bit more, right? And so often Republicans say that they oppose taxes, and then they turn around and what they support are actually regressive taxes or fees.
Mm-hmm.
That's happening in our own state right now. Governor Snyder has been cutting taxes for businesses, right? And but now he wants to fix the roads in Michigan. Well, how are you going to fix the roads in Michigan, Governor Snyder? Well, now he's talking about increasing the gasoline tax and
Right.
Increasing the fees for automobile registration. And then other Republicans are talking about what we really need to do is to increase the sales tax, right? Well, those are regressive taxes. Those are going to impact middle class and working class families much more than they're going to affect businesses or the wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, the taxes that they recognize that we got to fix the roads. We need tax revenues to do that. Where are we going to get the tax revenues? We've already slashed taxes over here
Right.
for the wealthy and for the businesses in the vain hope that that's going to lure in more jobs. And so now we're going to sock it to the middle class and the working class even more to raise the revenues to take care of what we need to take care of. But yet they'll say that they're against tax increases. Well, no, you're only against taxes for the businesses and the wealthy. You're certainly in favor of regressive taxes, it appears, given all the talk going on in Lansing, that are going to have a larger impact on middle and working class families.
And of course, when you are talking about a situation where there is this disproportionality of who's carrying the burden, what it means is that whose resources are diminished the most
Right.
by that unfair organization of
Exactly.
tax requirements.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He also talked about universal kindergarten. You mentioned earlier
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and I know one of the criticisms, I'd be curious how you think about this, is that the youngsters who come out of circumstances where there is fewer economic possibilities for them are already behind. And that the idea is that they need even more to catch up
Mm-hmm.
out of the financial and educational system.
Well, if we remember back in the 60s, the Head Start program was the first sort of early education program, and that was very specifically targeted to children that were coming out of families that were afflicted by poverty, low-income families. And so clearly there was a recognition many years ago that those kids are probably, given their circumstances, that they were going to be a bit behind compared to other kids coming out of middle-class families, higher income families that had greater economic resources and the opportunity for greater cultural enrichment, able to acquire what we sociologists call social capital, right?
Right.
So that those children are probably already going to be a little bit ahead. The kids coming out of the low-income family is going to be a bit behind, and so Head Start was designed to kind of help bring those kids up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, all that evidence shows that early education is very important and that it does help kids catch up, and it does help them move on and experience success. The larger question, of course, is what are we doing to reduce poverty, right?
Yes.
I mean, why is it that, okay, it's great to take kids and say we need universal pre-kindergarten or we need Head Start to get those kids caught up, but maybe we shouldn't let them fall behind in the first place, right?
Yep.
Maybe we ought to be trying to eliminate the poverty that leads to that condition in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So no talk of that
Right.
in the State of the Union, no larger issue concerning how do we reduce poverty in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, I know one person I had a conversation with was frustrated by the phrase reduce poverty. we ought to be talking about eliminating
Yeah, yeah,
poverty, because it's something, I don't know whether that's, whether that's economically possible, but
But there
he was
doesn't even
upset
seem
with,
to be the effort to try to reduce poverty nearly
Yes.
as much. I mean, and again, this is where the president would have been better to not talk so much about deficit reduction and talk about job creation, right? I mean, how are we pumping money in there? How are we going to help bring some of those working class and lower middle class families up and help them move out of poverty or near poverty? That seems to be more, it should have been more of a focus, I thought, of the speech than to talk about deficit reduction.
yeah. Yeah, the other, another criticism in the area of education was that he spent time talking about education that ought to help young people develop the skills for employability. And arguing, I mean, I think there's another argument. What happens to that part of education which prepares people for citizenship and creates motivated learners?
Right.
I mean, it's not just a matter of creating students who are going to go out and work in the workforce. That's important. But what about the other part of education, which is there to help people be better citizens?
Yeah, it was a very instrumentalist view on education, wasn't it? That
Right.
the purpose of the education is merely to give you technical skills to get a good job.
Yeah.
And anything else that education might produce that's of value was sort of left out of the picture, or even in a sense then devalued, right? So again, the whole notion that education is to help us to become critical thinkers, or
Right.
to learn to appreciate art and music and poetry, and broaden our horizons and make us more well-rounded humans, and provide us with skills to become good citizens, and all those kinds of things, which we hope that education can do, were sort of left off the table, and it narrows it down to this sort of instrumentalist view that the only reason you go to school is to get skills to get a job, and that connection to the job is the only thing that really matters.
Yeah, yeah.
And it does matter, but it's not the only thing. And both my wife and I were looking at each other when he was talking about education and kind of rolling our eyes, because he was leaving out all those other things which we as educators see are of greater value in the educational process.
Yeah, yeah. Our mutual read of the teaching as a subversive activity.
Yeah.
The author of that,
Neil Postman.
Neil Postman,
Yeah.
would have been apoplectic
Postman would have been.
at hearing him say that.
Yeah.
The global warming issue. I know we have already done some things on global warming. We're going to do more things, another program at least, I hope. My sort of difficulty with it is trying to understand how, out of a market-based system, I mean, what are the difficulties in trying to create citizens that are aware of and understand the issues, multiple issues related to global warming, when the solution seems to be, let's keep it within the kind of market-based economy that we have and work from that. Where are we with that?
Well, first of all, Obama has in recent months been speaking more and more about climate change. So I guess
That's good.
That's good. That's progress, right? Because so often during the first term he didn't see fit to mention it at all. So the night of the election, when he gave his sort of victory speech, he made an important plea for us to do something about climate change. In the inaugural speech, the second inaugural speech, he came back to the issue of climate change again. And again, in the State of the Union address, he very forcefully, I thought, addressed the need to, so I mean, immediately on my Facebook page, I shared 350.org's picture of Obama talking about climate change in the paragraph from the speech, and sent it out on my Facebook page to all my friends.
Great.
I'm always bugging them about climate change with stuff like that. So that's good. But what kind of actions? We're hearing lots of talk, but we're seeing relatively little action. And the steps that were taken during the first term, maybe working on, the increased mileage for fleet on the automobiles is, okay, that's good, that's a necessary step, but we need to do more than that. And then after talking forcefully about needing to take action, then he ties it completely to market-based solutions. So then I cringe because, I don't see that the market-based solutions are going to take us nearly as far as we need to go to reduce carbon emissions. We need action at the international level. We need an international agreement that's going to work with the other countries in the world to eliminate carbon emissions. Our own carbon emissions are going down a little bit. Most of that's tied to a switch over to using natural gas, which produces less in the way of greenhouse gases. But we've got to do something about what's happening in China. Soon India will be to the point where their development is going to lead to increasing greenhouse gas emissions there. And it has to be a worldwide effort. We can't do this, this can't be done if all the countries in the world don't get together and agree to drastically reduce their emissions. That's only going to happen if the United States takes leadership. Now,
Right.
I think our good friend Paul Clements is going to be here in a couple weeks on the program to talk more about this, but we need an international agreement, and so I'm disappointed that I didn't hear the president say, we've got to get the world community together, we've got to take action, we've got to come up with a treaty and agreement that's going to, and instead to talk about market-based solutions when, again, most of the time those are very inadequate, and they keep in place a economic system that's based on economic growth.
Right.
And you can't continue to have economic growth, uncontrollable economic growth to some extent on a planet with limited resources, and you can't continue to talk about unlimited economic growth in the face of the fact that the carbon emissions that come out of that economic growth are only going to hasten the global warming and the drastic climate changes that are already starting to occur. So it would have been much better for the president to talk about the need for developing a green economy here, right? I mean, I would have been much happier if he would say not market-based solutions, but necessarily we've got to talk about green economy. We've got to talk about creating jobs in which we are developing clean and renewable energy sources. We've got to drastically reduce our emission of greenhouse gases, which means we have to have a massive program to focus on conservation and also to create clean, renewable energy sources. Now, that's going to involve some kind of a transition, isn't it? I mean, we can't just say, all right, everybody who works in the fossil fuel industry, you're completely out of a job today. No, I mean, we have to have some planning. There has to be, back in the 70s and 80s when people were talking about reducing the military budget, they talked about the need for economic conversion, right? So again, those factories, those plants that are turning out, the missiles and the tanks and the nuclear weapons, we needed to have them stop that activity but transfer over to some other kind of productive activity. Well, now it's even more the case that we need to talk about some kind of economic conversion, moving out of fossil fuel type energy production into a different kind of economy in which, again, the focus is on those clean and renewable energy. So I would have liked to have heard more about that kind of transition than just say market-based solutions, because when you say market-based solutions, it seems to suggest that business as usual is going to continue. But if it's for the benefit of corporations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, well, maybe we will. If it's not to their benefit, we probably won't. And it's not going to be to their benefit for the most part. So to talk about it in that language suggests to me that the president's not really getting it, that he's not really serious about the need for drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and the need to have this kind of transformation of our energy economy. So that was my take on that. But I mean, it's good that he keeps talking about it. He clearly,
Yes, yeah.
he clearly is getting it, that this is a problem that we need to address. But it still seems that the political will to do the hard things that are necessary to really take the action is just not there yet. The commitment to the hard, and it's going to be hard choices, and some industries are going to be hurt. It's not going to be easy, but unless we, in a sense, bite the bullet, know that we're in for a rough transition, but we've got to start thinking and planning for that and it does take planning. It's not like you can snap your fingers and say that this is going to happen. And that for that planning to occur, it's going to require government to take the lead and government to invest the resources. So we talk about infrastructure investment. I think we need investment here for the kind of planning, for the kind of creation of the green jobs, for moving us ahead to clean, renewable energy sources.
Yeah, it seems to me that one of the things that we're talking about is that globally, we've been diminishing the resources that we have available to us for sustainable purposes. We can't do that anymore.
No.
I mean, we can't continue to do it at the rate we are. So how do we have a collective understanding that there are diminished resources? I mean, you can do it in a family. Dad brings home the paycheck and he says, we've got $75 less this week, and it's going to be that way, so you can make plans for it. But what are the ways in which, even for the United States, to begin a plan that reinforces and acknowledges that loss of resources? We're not going to be able to live high on the economic hog like we have been.
Right. Well, again, it's the idea that the president keeps talking about this all of the above kind of policy, right? Which means, okay, yeah, we are going to try to reduce emissions from our automobile fleets, and we are going to try to start creating some green or some renewable energy over here, but we're also going to have to keep, searching for natural gas, and we're also, so all of the above, we're still going to have to keep working in all fronts. Well, again, that just seems to be to show that you're not really serious. It's kind of a, okay, can I please everybody by talking about all of the above? Can I please the fossil fuel industry? Can I please the environmentalists? Can I get everybody to, say amen? If I talk about all of the above energies, well, again, you can't please everybody. The president has to make hard choices. The government has to take certain kinds of steps if we're going to do anything. I mean, if we're really serious about reducing carbon emissions, if we're really serious about keeping global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, and that's our best hope right now, to keep it to 2 degrees Celsius. Bad things happen even then. If we're really serious about that, hard choices have to be made. You can't just keep trying to please everybody and say, oh, well, all of the above, everybody can be made happy, everybody can get what they want out of this. No, it's just not going to be possible to do that. So that shows me, again, a lack of seriousness, that he, again, used that phrase, all of the above energy policy. And all of the above energy policy basically means that we're going to continue to have greenhouse gas emissions that will contribute to global warming, and we're not going to be able to keep the warming under 2 degrees. And again, if we don't have an international agreement, nobody else in the world is going to take any strong steps that are needed. And so, in the end, we're not going to do anything about this. And we have to do something about this. We have to be serious about this. So, I think the president gets it at one level, but he just doesn't seem to have the political courage yet to talk tougher and act tougher and risk incurring the wrath of some people to take the tough steps that are going to have to be taken. I think Barack Obama is a person who likes to please as many people as he possibly can. And we're all that way, right? I think to some extent. But he seems, as a politician, to want to try to please as many people as he possibly can. He bent over backwards, I think, during his first term to try to, work with the Republicans, and they kept slapping him in the face. And he shouldn't expect that he's going to get a lot of cooperation. And I think that's the other thing. probably there's also the other people who would come in and say, well, Kramer, look, you got to be politically realistic here, right?
Yep.
Obama's got a deal. You know, you can sit up there in your university and talk about all this pie in the sky utopian stuff, but the president's got to deal with Congress, and the House is in the control of the Republicans, and the Republicans in the Senate can you know, gum things up by the filibuster, and you know, you have to deal with the real world. Well, I understand that there are those kind of restraints, and that, you know, again, there is the practical political world that Obama has to live in, and I, as a pundit on a television program, don't have to pay any attention to, perhaps.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, if we're really serious about climate change, you know, he's got to do things that are tougher, and he's got to push us ahead. He can't just keep talking about all of the above. He can't just talk about market-based solutions. That's just not going to cut it. That's just not going to do it. This is a problem that is so difficult to deal with. This is a problem that is so severe, that is so threatening to the future of our planet and our children and our grandchildren, that we can't play those kinds of political games. We've got to see stronger action, and I just would like to see the president. I mean, right now, I mean, Barack Obama is the most progressive politician, most progressive president that we could have possibly expected to elect, I think, in this particular era.
Right.
And we need him to take more of a leadership role here and to make tougher choices to deal with climate change.
Yeah. You know, as you speak about it, one of the things that comes to my mind that I don't know how much we want to get into it, but the idea of in a market-based system, at least one of the parties, in my mind, the Republicans at this point, have done as much as they can to promote what Chris Hedges calls political passivity. I mean, they don't really want the public involved. And yet we're aware that there's a need for the public to be involved, because unless we put pressure on the government and the president and our senators and representatives, nothing is going to be done.
Exactly.
Or very little is going to be done. So the more passive the system, the more passivity the system promotes, the less effective that we are in doing anything about it, as you're pointing out.
And this is why social movements are so important, and environmental movement right now is really a necessary element here. Bill McKibben and his organization 350.org has played an enormous leadership role in trying to create that kind of political pressure, to create the kind of public involvement and investment in this issue. And you know, we just need to see more of that. And right now, a lot of that effort is being directed at the Keystone XL pipeline, because Obama has to make a decision about that. And that'll be the major test, I think, about how serious the president really is. If he's serious about climate change, he's going to have to just completely cancel that project. Again, he seems unwilling to do that. He's been wishy-washy about it, as he's been wishy-washy about a lot of these issues. We can't have wishy-washy right now. We've got to have strong action. We've got to say no. You know, we can't do this. If we do this, the game's over as far as climate change. And so again, we need much stronger, bolder leadership out of Barack Obama on this issue.
And we had news, yesterday, that there were a group of people who handcuffed themselves to the fence at in Washington, at the Capitol, at the White House, and were arrested because they are sort of representing the group that is not passive, and that we need to model ourselves afterward. But there's a third point I want to raise in light of this, because this is really fun and interesting to me. Under a market-based solution, only a few are enriched, while the many are sort of left out or reduced in the amount of well, actually pretty much left out. The enrichment doesn't come to, especially when we have what's going on now, and we have 1% of the population controlling and commanding so much power because of their money. But can this is more speculative, I guess, can we do anything about the funnel that enriches so few, who control so many of these corporations and industries that are doing the polluting, that makes it necessary for us to move to a greener economy sooner?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the idea that unless you can appeal to somebody's greed to get them to do the right thing, that they won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's just completely wrong. But, you know, if you're going to, and again, there would be some critics who would say, look, it's the market-based system, it's capitalism itself that, you know, is dependent upon unlimited economic growth and continually expanding economy and runs on the extraction and burning of fossil fuels. And so, you know, again, you can't really solve the problem overall within the framework of capitalism itself, because capitalism itself as an economic system, as an economic engine of growth, is the main root of it, is the root cause, right? So, I mean, you know, there are some critics out there that are going to say, well, you know, you got to deal with, you know, Barack Obama's not going to come out and say that, right? But, so, given that the president's not going to say, well, capitalism itself is the problem and we need to restructure our economic system and move to a more of a participatory economic system, or an economic system that's based more on economic democracy, he's not going to say that.
No.
But we do need to have government play some kind of a role within a market economy that's going to push us forward. And you can't just say, well, it has to be completely market-based solutions, only capitalist-type solutions, only if some people can be enriched by participating in the effort to reduce greenhouse gases will it get done. And that's just not gonna get it done.
Yeah. Well, can we turn to the issue of immigration?
Well, I just wanted to bring one other economic issue.
Oh, okay, fine.
Because I think this was very important. The president did propose increasing the federal minimum wage to $9.
Yeah.
And again, some people say, well, why not 10? Ralph Nader has been promoting 10 as the better solution. But I just wanted to bring that up again. This seems to be a very important and necessary step if we're really serious about helping people, helping the middle class, helping the working class survive in this particular economy, that we do need to make sure that the minimum wage gets increased. So I wanted to applaud the president for that proposal, and to say that, it should have been a little bit more even than that. Maybe 10 would have been better than 9, but at least let's get it up to 9, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, you know, when we worked on it locally, we were striking out for 10. And with health benefits, and $12.50, I think it was. Don should be here; he could tell us more accurately. But I think it was somewhere around $12 or $12.50 for those who did not have insurance. Insurance coverage at the same time. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and what that campaign was all about, you know, that Don helped to lead, was for a living wage. Okay. You can talk about a minimum wage, but you can also talk about a living wage. So, to some extent, what I think Ralph Nader is saying, and the president sort of obliquely, is that we need to move the minimum wage up so that it becomes closer to a living wage, because currently it's not a living wage.
Right.
Too many people who are making minimum wages are falling below the poverty line. It's not a living wage for those people. We've got to move it up so that it approaches closer to a living wage for the average American worker.
Yeah. Well, then we can go to immigration. You want to say a little bit about
what did you think about the president's?
Well, I think, you know, he talked about it. I didn't recall whether he said anything about the length of time that it takes for so many people to get their appropriate papers. And I know I've read that sometimes it can take as many as 20 years for a person who's applying through legitimate channels to get the appropriate papers for citizenship. So
he didn't talk about it. He said cut the waiting period. That was the language I think that he used, but he didn't specify what that cut should be.
No.
And Yeah, I think he was a bit disappointing on that as well. But that seems to be an issue now that, given the election results and given the Latino vote and Hispanic vote in the recent election, that the Republican Party realizes that it needs to appeal to those voters more. So I think you're seeing a softening on the Republican side on that particular issue, at least at the congressional level. And so I think there's some room there to work and to maneuver. So I think I would have liked to seen Obama come out with a stronger, more explicit policy there to put a little bit more pressure on the Republicans in the Senate and in the House. It's because I think they're in a box right now. They realize that they're in deep trouble with those Latino voters, and they have to do something. There has to be some kind of comprehensive immigration reform. So I wish the president would have been a bit more specific and stronger and been talking about exactly how much we should cut that waiting time and
more details.
Providing details about the path to citizenship. I think he could have been stronger, and he would have been in a pretty strong position given the Republican Party's weakness on with Latino voters right now.
One of the other items was the fact that he never mentioned the word Palestinian. Throughout the entire speech, he talked about that area of the world and the difficulties there. What sense do you make out of that? He's going to be visiting, I gather, in Israel. So,
well, I think the most disappointing part of the State of the Union address was the section on foreign policy. Just overall, I was extremely disappointed. I think any progressive had to be disappointed. He sort of continued with threatening Iran, right, and saying we're not going to let them get a nuclear weapon. And he never mentioned the Palestinians at all, as you pointed out. He defended his drone warfare policy, which creates so much havoc in that region of the world. And so again, overall, just disappointed. He's talking about getting out of Afghanistan sooner. Reducing the number of uniformed personnel there. Of course, that doesn't mean that all the other contractors, that our other involvements and our bases there are going to go away.
Yeah, the CIA certainly isn't going to leave.
No. So, I mean, I'm very disappointed, and especially, again, to talk about the Middle East and to talk about Iran and Iran's program to obtain a nuclear weapon, if that's really what they're doing. And again, it's not exactly clear that they're moving ahead on this, that there's still room for some kind of a diplomatic agreement. But you can't say to Iran, you can't develop a nuclear weapon while we say nuclear weapons are so important for our defense. And when we know that the State of Israel has 250 nuclear weapons, and nobody will ever talk about that, right? Israel won't acknowledge it, and we won't mention it. And so, again, when the test ban, not the test ban, the non-proliferation treaty talks went on 2 years ago. There was a big push to create a conference which would focus on a nuclear weapons-free Middle East, right? To have a nuclear weapons-free zone in the entire Middle East. Now, the United States and Israel adamantly oppose this, because what that means is then you have to talk about Israel's nuclear weapons. You can't just say, Iran, you can't have one, while Israel's sitting there with 250, we're sitting there with thousands. Again, Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons. So again, it's this blatant hypocrisy, right? Blatant hypocrisy. Some states say we need nuclear weapons to protect ourselves, to defend our national security, and yet then we turn to other nations and say, you can't develop nuclear weapons. And there's no way that you will ever stop the proliferation. I mean, Iran's going to go ahead and try to do this eventually if we keep threatening them, if they see Israel as a threat to their national security, and they see other nations of the world having nuclear weapons for protection or even for enhancing their international prestige. So if we have them and then we turn around and say, we have them, but you can't have them. We have them for all the right and important reasons, and you can't have them for those same reasons.
Yeah.
Again, that's just a blatant hypocrisy. The only way that we can actually keep the Irans of the world from moving forward and developing nuclear weapons, making the world more unstable, is that we've got to live up to our commitment. We made a legally binding commitment all the way back in 1968 with the Non-Proliferation Treaty that if the Irans of the world did not pursue nuclear weapons, we would then turn around and we would disarm. And we have, again, violated this very fundamental and basic treaty from the very beginning. And Israel never signed it, India never signed it, Pakistan never signed it. They all went ahead and developed nuclear weapons. The nations of the world that did sign it, including Iran, are now being left holding the bag, right? Everybody, you know, these other nations that didn't sign it have moved ahead and developed nuclear weapons. The nuclear powers that did sign it have reneged on their fundamental promise to reduce their arsenals and to, disarm, to eliminate their arsenals. And so now, again, here's Iran being lectured and hectored and saying, you can't develop one, right? And why would they even think to develop one in the first place, if only for self-defense? I mean, the mullahs of Iran are not stupid, right? They're not going to develop a nuclear weapon and then immediately launch it at Israel, right? That would be totally suicidal. They're not irrational, they're not suicidal, but they see that having a nuclear weapon or the threat of developing a nuclear weapon gives them some leverage, allows them to play a role in the Middle East, provides them with some protection against attack. I mean, they witnessed what happened to their neighbors on either side of them, right?
Right.
Both Afghanistan and Iraq, what happened to them? They were both invaded. And so, again, for Obama then to just come back and, once again, threaten Iran and say, we're not going to allow this, and then to not say anything about the Israeli arsenal and to say nothing about addressing the concerns of the Palestinian people. And again, it just leaves the whole process, the peace process there, stalled, right? Nothing's happening, no pressure is being put on Israel to dismantle the settlements in the West Bank and in Gaza, and Gaza remains a prison, basically. So, yeah, I mean, very disappointing the president didn't. But the most disappointing, again, is the drone thing, right? Because here, the president, and prior to the State of the Union, the white paper came out from, this was written by the Office of Legal Counsel. I mean, the Office of Legal Counsel has written several memos, which basically says our use of drones in the borderlands between Afghanistan and Pakistan is legal. Because we say it's legal, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, you're going to commit a crime, or you have committed a crime, and you hire some hotshot attorney who comes in and said, no, Lynn didn't commit a crime, ignoring the law, and basically just saying, no, Lynn didn't, well, that's not going to wash, right? So a court's going to have something to say about that, right? But here we have the situation that the Office of Legal Counsel, independent of what the law really says, international law in particular, independent of any ruling by a court, simply says, well, no, the president did it, so it's okay. Or we're saying that it's legal, so therefore it's legal. I mean, that just wouldn't fly in any other kind of circumstance, but we allow it to go on here. I mean, this program is blatantly illegal. It does violate international law. It does kill innocent civilians. And to see the president cling to this program and to see it as the centerpiece of his foreign policy is very, very disappointing. And to see him then rely on these flimsy, self-serving documents from the Office of Legal Counsel. I mean, the Bush administration did this, and we roundly criticized them for doing it, didn't we?
Right.
John Yoo and the Office of Legal Counsel wrote all kinds of memos saying, well, the Bush administration's engaging in these enhanced interrogation techniques. They look exactly like torture, but they're not really torture, right? And I mean, we criticized them and we ridiculed that kind of flimsy legal covering. And Obama's doing the same exact thing. We need to strongly condemn that as well.
Yeah, which creates a continuation of the context in which, as as a government, as a nation, we have threatened one place on the globe after another place on the globe with the possibility of nuclear destruction if things aren't organized and continued, if that be the case, or begun to occur in a different way. I mean, we have carried the big stick, and I think it's probably, in psychology, we'd call it projection. We are afraid that they are going to act like we would act if we were in their position, which would be to bomb the dickens out of whoever we see as a threat.
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly no one wants Iran to develop a nuclear weapon, right?
Right.
We don't want any other country to develop nuclear weapons. We want the countries that have nuclear weapons to get rid of them, right?
Get rid of them, yes.
But right now it's this blatant double standard, this hypocrisy, that it's okay for us to have them, it's okay for Israel to have them, it's okay for India to have them, but no, you, Iran, don't even think about starting to develop one in a measure of self-defense. And of course, we always attribute the worst motives to them, right? We never see that this might be a defensive move on their part.
Right.
We only see this as them being irrational and threatening to Israel, right? And of course, you know, they make very ludicrous and ridiculous statements about Israel on a regular basis, which only inflames the situation even more, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it ends up being a crazy situation, but I don't think we advance it by lecturing them and insisting that they can't possibly develop a weapon, and if they do, the military consequences are going to follow.
Right.
That's not going to solve the situation.
Right. I'm being told we have just about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
And I know we have 2 books from the book corner.
Yeah, we haven't done the book corner in a while.
Why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about
sure.
Ralph?
Let's. Our good friend Ralph Nader has a book called The 17 Solutions, Bold Ideas for Our American Future. And I wish that President Obama had read Ralph Nader's book prior to making the State of the Union address and had borrowed some of the solutions, some of the ideas that Ralph Nader articulates here. So I highly recommend this. If people are looking for progressive ideas about moving our country forward, about creating solutions for the many problems that face us, this is an excellent place to start. He has 17 different proposals that he makes in the book. I think they're all good ones, and again, I wish Obama would be reading and advancing some of these solutions himself.
Okay,
and you have a book as well.
Very quickly, I want to encourage people to take a look at this book, Why Leaders Lie, by John Mersheimer. And basically, he's made 4 or 5 points. I'm only going to cover a couple because our time is fleeting. But he points out that international lying comes in various forms, but most importantly, the distinction between the lies that states tell each other and those that leaders tell their own publics is the most important.
Right.
And he goes on then to say the most dangerous kind of international lies are those that leaders tell to their own citizens.
Right.
And we can think of numerous examples. He goes on to say that leaders usually tell international lies for good reasons, not because they are craven or corrupt. And I put a question mark at the end of that one. Well, our time is up. Thank you for being with us. We hope you will join us next time, and we will have Don Cooney back from assignment, and
Lee Ford, we hope.
and maybe Lee Ford. So please join us then, and thank you for being with us on this occasion.